Hey, it's 10 a.m., so let's kick off this web conference. I'm Louis de Montalembert, the founder of Played Asset Management and the co-manager with Maxence Debut of the PAM Cloud Revolution Fund. So we are doing this web conference on the cloud, which is an ongoing digital revolution for businesses and especially accelerated by generative AI, which is a topic that I am sure interests everyone right now. So a quote that I enjoy sharing quite regularly is Carlos Tavares, who approximately 2 years ago summoned his investors to announce his well-thought-out strategic plan. And in its strategic plan, it announced that Stellantis is aiming for 20 billion euros in recurring software revenue by 2030. What is truly significant is the fact that currently there are only a few cloud companies that are able to generate 20 billion euros in terms of revenue. And finally, what does Carlos Tavares tell us? He's telling us the same thing as the revolution we experienced with the phone, which originally was just a tool to project our voice a few hundred kilometers, has become a super powerful microcomputer packed with artificial intelligence, with multiple uses and computing power that is much greater than the computing power that allowed men to project themselves onto the moon in 1969. So a car, like, it is a piece of hardware with 4 wheels and an engine. You cannot possibly imagine anything more hardware-like or mechanical than a car. And finally, what Carlos Tavares is telling us is that a car is going to be a technological platform for software applications with a lot of artificial intelligence, especially smart interfaces and autonomous driving. We could say the same thing about John Deere in September with Maxence. We were in Nashville to meet some companies. John Deere, the manufacturer of tractors, is announcing today that we are a technology company that happens to produce tractors. And it is a fact there are an increasing number of technologies present inside a tractor, utilizing sophisticated algorithms to optimize routes, maintenance, input quantities, and other related aspects. There is a general movement towards technologization that can only be realized through the utilization of cloud technology. So what is the deal with the cloud? The genesis, it is the internet born in the 1990s. And then the advent of high-speed internet in the 2000s enables internet behemoths to emerge, such as Google, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and so on. And in reality, commencing from the launch of these substantial platforms, they constructed, like AWS and Google, a global network of data centers for their own operations and to cater to the needs of their expanding user base around the world. And it wasn't until 2010 that they opened up this complete and global infrastructure to third parties, to third-party actors, and what allows a software revolution that goes from the software we call legacy today, which is installed in companies, on company servers, to software we call cloud native, that is, which we access through Windows on the internet. This is a real game changer for the software that is driven by this global infrastructure. We are aware of the benefits of the cloud, but what exactly is it? It refers to the ability to access computer services in a decentralized and remote manner. When it comes to infrastructure these days, an increasing number of companies are opting not to use proprietary servers. Instead, they are transitioning to cloud platforms, which can be either public, such as AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure, or private for larger companies. This shift enables companies to access all of their applications in a decentralized and remote manner. So it becomes more of a service than an investment. There are absolutely multiple advantages. We personally engage in these practices on a daily basis, striking a balance between scalability and flexibility in our approach. It is considerably more economical. Absurdity does not reveal anything at all in any way. I always provide an example. We at IADAM make use of a portfolio management system known as Infin, who operated in contrast to our previous legacy system, leading to a reduction in cost by 10%, while providing approximately 2.5 times more features compared to before. It is evidently a reduction in costs, simplified and remote management, constant availability of data, and a security system that has been completely changed and outsourced, with more emphasis on the cloud, rather than on companies' own infrastructure. So how do we see what we call the cloud pyramid? When people talk about the cloud, they think about the infrastructure and first and foremost about Microsoft Azure, AWS for Amazon, and Google Cloud. You got to know that these three companies account for 70% of the cloud infrastructure worldwide. Below, and it is currently a highly discussed and trending topic, there are the semiconductors. There's been a lot of talk about NVIDIA, AMD, Broadcom, and Supermicros lately because they've had stellar stock performances. They're the key suppliers of chips and semiconductors for the infrastructure, you know. Actually, when we look at this pyramid, what interests us first and foremost is what I would call the cloud superstructure, which is everything that the cloud enables. Within it, we find service platforms like Snowflake, which is an American company founded by French people, or Adyen in the payment sector, Twilio in what we call communication, MongoDB, which could be somewhat affiliated with Snowflake as it deals with databases, or what we call edge computing with Cloudflare. And above all, there are the SaaS software, which stands for software as a service that we are all increasingly using. These range from historical software that has transitioned to software as a service, or even better, what we call cloud native software, which means they were truly created on the cloud. Today, the big topic is generative AI, and we've seen that the economic or financial visibility of generative AI for now has been mainly at the level of semiconductors, with absolutely incredible performances from specific chip manufacturers for generative AI, foremost among them NVIDIA. However, what is intriguing about the most recent earnings announcement from NVIDIA is that 40% of NVIDIA's revenue was generated, or 40% of chip purchases were made, for a concept known as inference. In the field of generative artificial intelligence, initially we possessed these large language models, also known as LLMs, which necessitate a significant number of chips for the purpose of training. Once you've created a model, the interesting part is putting it into a specific data set for a specific use case, and that's what we call inference. The 40% proportion of NVIDIA chips sold for inference, in contrast to the less than 20% proportion in the previous quarter, indicates that the proliferation of generative AI in platforms and software is progressing at a much faster pace than initially expected. Thus, the dissemination of generative AI will occur via the cloud and software applications. It's not going to happen just because you and I use ChatGPT for one activity or another. It's going to happen in all the software we use on a daily basis. And so we can see that there is an acceleration of this spread in software. And notably on our side, we see more and more features related to generative AI. An example of a tech stack on cloud-based companies within a well-known company that we are all familiar with, which is Uber. But in the center, we could have had more traditional, more bricks and mortar businesses. Here on Uber, we've looked at their technology stack, and we can see that there are about 15 cloud companies used by Uber, whether it's Adyen for payment or when we communicate with the driver Twilio or Cinch. In terms of database management, we have MongoDB, which is an up-and-coming player in the so-called NoSQL database, meaning it can handle unstructured or textual data. It's a very interesting player with a revenue of around 1.6 billion, growing at 35% in a database market. That's around 90 billion and growing at 13%. We all know Oracle as the ultimate database deity. Oracle in its organic form doesn't grow by 5 to 7%, so it is slower than its market. So we have some new actors who are really emerging as cloud native. Elastic, which specializes in search, is the software used to find an Uber. It is a software that has a second life in a way because it specializes in vector search, which is key in generative AI. It is a specific way of organizing and retrieving data that is crucial for generative AI. These emerging actors in the cloud native space are making significant contributions to the field of artificial intelligence. Datadog in data observability is an American company founded by French folks. Then we have a whole cybersecurity suite, starting from edge computing, which I mentioned earlier with Cloudflare, so that we can respond to clients quickly, all the way to client identification with Okta. And then within the organization, in terms of marketing, Uber employs the services of Braze and HubSpot for their marketing needs. And for team collaboration, they utilize two, which are referred to as WorkOS, namely Monday and Smartsheet. So we observe behind the scenes of a company such as Uber. There are already 15 cloud companies that are part of the technological stack. What is the method for categorizing the different companies operating in the cloud computing industry? Actually, we have a segmentation into 4 subsegments. What is called cloud migration is actually features that already existed in so-called legacy or historical software and are gradually being replaced by cloud-native players. Salesforce is widely recognized as the pioneer of cloud computing, while Hotspot is another popular CRM platform that enables efficient team collaboration, project management using Monday, and streamlined payroll and human resources management. We used to have big players like ADP or Paychex who are gradually being replaced by players like Paycom, Workday, Paylocity, and others. Yet the core of the cloud, or our intrigue in the cloud, is the abundance of new possibilities that are now accessible. Actually, the cloud enables software to penetrate sectors of the economy where it wasn't before and replace physical processes with digital ones. Actually, the most well-known example, which you're all familiar with, is DocuSign. DocuSign, 10 years ago, you had to sign stacks of documents, so on paper, and send them by mail. Today, the majority of contract signings are done through DocuSign, so it's a physical process that is being replaced by a digital process. Another advantage of the cloud is its ultimate ability to generate exponential amounts of data, but above all, to organize and arrange this data in order to create signals. Consequently, there is a whole segment that we refer to as data solutions, wherein we can find the previously mentioned tools like MongoDB, Snowflake, or Datadog, but also various analytical possibilities for leveraging this data and extracting valuable insights. We all talk about data as the black gold of the 21st century because it's at the heart of productivity gains, and above all, this data is essential for generative AI, since we all know that algorithms are fed by data, and that's what will allow companies in particular to put LLMs in their data set. That is to say, in their set of data once they are organized and optimized, consequently the workflows of companies. Sorry for the anglicisms, but we are in the tech world. Additionally, since we are in a decentralized IT system, we have a cybersecurity architecture that has undergone radical changes with the emergence of new players, resulting in the decline of old ones like Symantec, and these new players have quickly emerged and made a significant impact. If I tell you about CrowdStrike, it's a company that made $117 million in revenue in 2017. And in 2023 recorded $3 billion in revenue. So the emergence of new players is occurring very rapidly. So when we talk about the cloud, now that you've understood that it's this pyramid and not just the infrastructure itself, where are we in terms of penetration in the global IT? As per Gartner in 2022, we were at 9% of the global IT that was cloudified. We were still below 10% by the end of 2023. And if we look at it from the company's perspective, we were at a penetration rate of 17%. So we're really at the beginning of this new digital revolution that's for businesses. Now, if we look ahead a little bit, ultimately Gartner has projections for 2030 with a penetration rate that would increase from 17% to 36%, which means a growth of the cloud, so of this pyramid that I showed you earlier, which is around 17% per year by 2030. And in closer proximity to us, McKinsey conducted a study among CTOs, chief technological officers, from a multitude of companies spanning across a wide range of sectors and industries. And there we have a part of the study that shows that in a certain number of sectors, the adoption today is still pretty low, but the 3-year adoption plan is extremely important. So when we look at the 17% per year by 2030, it's likely that there will be an acceleration or a growth rate that's almost more significant in the next 3 years than over this whole 8-year horizon, since Gartner's study is from 2022. So to really understand the cloud's penetration potential, we've thrown in a few unexpected companies for you. These are companies that aren't publicly traded today, but they generate at least $100 million in annual recurring revenue, or ARR. In the cloud, we frequently encounter a subscription system. Therefore, we decided I am going to concentrate on a company known as Sense. Sense, it is similar to the cloud for laundromats. What may seem completely strange is that laundromats are essentially just hardware, which makes it even more intriguing. When you connect a washing machine to the cloud, it allows the operator of the laundromat to know the status of its predictive maintenance, the consumption of its consumables, to provide payment methods to its customers, to directly update its accounting, and to provide its customers with an app that allows them to reserve a washing machine and see where it is in the washing cycle. And thus, we promptly observe the entirety of the mechanization of an automated library that the cloud has the capability to provide. Finally, the business model I just described is more or less the business model of Doctolib in France. We ourselves, we are not customers of Doctolib, we are users. The client is the healthcare practitioner, and it enables them to automate appointment scheduling, interactions with health insurance companies, and their accounting in the same manner. So this model, it has the potential to be duplicated in multiple sectors, Service Titan, it is essentially the same thing for professionals in home services, covering topics such as appointment scheduling, intervention organization, and so forth. These firms, they're starting. They've exceeded all present the 100M mark and are nearing 200M. Of annual recurring revenue, but Sense with only 2% of the automatic service Titan only in the United States, 1%. Some experts in home services were at the start of all the new trends we were talking about that will soon spread and have a significant impact on the industry. Today, there are 250 companies worldwide listed on the stock market that are what we call cloud services companies. But there are candidates for listing. We all know that with what happened in 2022, the markets have been extremely unfavorable to the theme, and therefore there has been no more listing. There's a new class of private companies called unlisted, known as the Centaurs, a label created by BCM Air Venture Partners, the primary cloud financier in the United States. Starting from the observation that a unicorn was deadly because it was nothing more than an object that people were willing to pay $1 billion for, they believed that for a unicorn to be immortal, it needs to undergo mutation in 100 years, reaching 100 million in annual recurring revenue. At this revenue level, the company demonstrates product market fit, indicating a proven market and product. Generally, it is structurally profitable even if companies at this stage overinvest in sales and marketing to conquer customers. So there are 150 firms that are prepared to become publicly traded in the upcoming quarters, and it will be contingent upon the sentiment in the markets. And by the way, there are French clients on the stock exchange who are international companies such as Dataiku, Ecovalis, Doctolib, Bravo, Content Square, Conto, and Planisware, which I prefer not to mention since they attempted to go public this year. Another remarkable aspect of this sector is its hypergrowth status. We mentioned Salesforce, but there are numerous French champions with potential to enter the markets in the upcoming months. The other point that is extraordinary about this sector is the hypergrowth status. We talked about Salesforce, who took 5 years to go from 100 million to 1 billion in annual recurring revenue. Closer to home, Snowflake, a company specialized in data warehousing and data lakes, is an American company founded by French people, had a revenue of $98 million in 2018 and made 2.8 billion in 2023, multiplying its revenue by 28 in 5 years, showing a remarkable growth trajectory. Why is it possible to observe the business models of the traditional economy when we examine them closely? To grow by 10%, you got to build a factory, you got to stock up, you got to mobilize some capital, you got to train some folks. And in that location, how do we achieve this absolutely mind-blowing growth and success? Because we're in the digital world and we're not in the physical world, we're dealing with a system that often involves subscriptions or pay-as-you-go when it comes to data models, and it's subscriptions or prepaid consumption models. So that's a fundamental point. That means we have negative working capital needs, and that means that since we do not have any physical investments, what we call CapEx in bad French or Anglicism, it means that growth generates cash flow as opposed to the example I gave you. Typically, Stellantis announced its results the other day. They made 10 billion in operating cash flow, but only 4 billion in free cash flow, because behind it is a company in the physical world that has to make very heavy investments in order to support its operations and drive future growth. Here, it's very different. On the contrary, generally speaking, we have a free cash flow that is higher than the operating margin. The conquest of customers leads to growth, which means that when salespeople go on January 2nd, they are not generating the first euro of revenue, but rather they are generating the additional revenue that will drive growth and contribute to the overall success of the business. It's even better than that. Actually, since we have a really high customer retention rate, meaning a churn rate of less than 5%, we don't lose many clients because they are usually critical services for businesses. But on top of that, since we can directly inject features into the system and the system can grow within client companies, we have a dollar retention rate that is over 100%. It can be 120%, 130% on a firm like Snowflake, 150%, indicating that we are generating more and more revenue with our current clients. And we have an example with ServiceNow that is visual, where we can see the different customer vintages. And it's clear that even the oldest customers are growing their revenue share in the company's total revenue in dollars. That's what we call the cohort effect. And that's what allows for this stratospheric growth. There is a key driver of cloud adoption. I told you it's cheaper. It's the productivity gains it brings. We won't read you all the examples written here, and you can access the understanding later for further comprehension. But typically, bill is an interesting example. Payments in the United States, B2B payments are still made with 40% paper checks today. Bill determined that the cost of processing a paper invoice is approximately $22 per invoice. And utilizing the initial module developed by Bill enables you to save $7 on processing that particular invoice. It's huge, and you think in the context of an economic slowdown, who can afford not to save these $7 per invoice processing? So we clearly see that even in the context of an economic slowdown, there is a backpedaling for cloud companies. So generative AI is similar to a genuine game changer, and it is going to be a tremendous driver for the adoption of cloud technology. In fact, what is software? A software refers to a user interface. There is generative, and its primary purpose is to minimize human intervention in this man-machine interface. You can see the money-saving factors right away, and there are 3 of them. There is automation, which is how generative AI enables the replacement of humans in time-consuming tasks. It will be like pre-filling tickets in the CRM, automated emails, and automatically generated reports by the generative AI system. It is going to be an amazing blast. It is a valuable tool for users to boost their efficiency. You witness it in the case of computer developers. You witness it in the case of cybersecurity analysis. We ourselves use an advisory committee with tech specialists. The boss of cybersecurity at Microsoft France, who's on our committee, was telling us how generative AI could cut down the time it takes to solve a problem from 10 hours to just 10 minutes. And since we are aware that there is an increasing number of cyber attacks, our requirements for cybersecurity analysis are growing exponentially. In fact, generative artificial intelligence emerges to counterbalance these exponential requirements with tools that enhance the efficiency of these analyses. And finally, the third factor is exploration. Actually, generative AI allows us to explore new features using natural language. Typically, if we take Copilot for Office 360, I'm sure that you, like us, when we make a PowerPoint, we only know 10% of PowerPoint's features. The generative AI, you just have to give it a command. It knows the remaining 80% of the generative AI features, which allows us to be much more efficient in using the tools we already use. We have a few scenarios, business cases, as we say. GitLab is a cloud-based coding platform that allows for collaborative coding. It's the equivalent of GitHub at Microsoft. It provides programming assistance today, automatically detects errors in the code and therefore finds remedies, but it also allows for explaining code in natural language. And when we have new coders coming in, instead of having them review the entire code, it allows for easily understanding what this piece of code does. And these are productivity gains that we have verified with the CTO. And likewise, in our committee, we have the boss of Dell France, who works with the companies of the CAC 40. Those are his clients, and who works on very concrete business cases. And the expected productivity gains for developers are around 40 to 50%. So it's really huge. And it's interesting because when OpenAI launched its LLM, its GPT chat, its original data set, actually, they didn't tell him learn to code. They noticed that once he was out of the data set, he knew how to code. And that has become one of the most unexpected advancements in generative artificial intelligence. It's not the same case in Unity. Unity is a 3D coding platform, especially for games. On the example of the house with the red roof, historically, you needed to have a coder who codes all the lines of code to make a red roof. Today, all you got to do is say in Muse or Centis, which are the two generative tools, give me a red roof, we get the suggestion, we click, we choose. Same with the movement of a character. You know, back in the day, it had to be fully coded. Today, you must tell the tool in clear language how to make the movement, so you can obtain some significant productivity gains. Procore is the same thing. It is a software platform for construction that allows you to connect all the players involved in a construction project, which is a sector that is very low on software, with people who use a lot of Excel. So it's an extremely interesting software solution that addresses the unique needs of the construction industry. Generative AI enables you to process the vast amount of documentation generated in a construction project, thereby facilitating the provision of real-time information within this extensive documentation in a significantly more efficient manner. And thus implementing this software platform on the cloud enables the extra benefit of having generative links accessibility, even on portable computers and other mobile devices. And we all know that construction requires this decentralization because we have numerous actors who are present on site at construction sites. And then the generative AI, because it screens all of the project's data, enables the identification of errors that are typically accountable for approximately 5% of the project's additional expenses. It's major 5% on a construction project, probably equal to the profit margin or a significant portion of the profit margin. So generative AI is key to improving the profitability of a sector. ServiceNow, which is like the behind the scenes powerhouse for companies, whether they're tech or not, had a big product launch in the fourth quarter called Now Assist. It was the biggest product launch ever for ServiceNow. And that's saying something considering they're an $8 billion company. It's the biggest launch in the history of the company. And indeed, we can observe in an illustration of ticketing on an e-commerce actor that a customer would express that their shipment of a mug was damaged during the transportation process, and they are seeking a resolution for this issue. In reality, the generative AI tool effectively automates almost the entire process of replacing the mug, whereas in the past, there was a requirement for an agent to be involved in the process. And when it's necessary to involve an agent because the AI can't solve the problem, She gives him all the information and suggestions for solutions that allow the agent to click on the solution and initiate it, which, by the way, generates the impact report that the agent used to have to complete by himself. So it is a significant gain in productivity for agents. You must understand that I'm talking about existing products, but with generative AI making big progress, we'll still have progress with fully automated treatments in the long run by generative AI, or, as I mentioned at GitLab earlier, entire code sections that will be generated by generative AI. The same applies to Intuit, a big company that handles accounting for small and medium-sized enterprises. Intuit has implemented Intuit Assist across all its products, enabling automatic creation of marketing campaigns for SMEs with image generation features, better analysis of the company's financial health, and suggestions for actions to improve financial health through automatic generation of client follow-ups. This comprehensive solution provided by Intuit Assist helps SMEs streamline their marketing efforts, gain insights into their financial well-being, and take proactive steps towards enhancing their overall financial health. Another example of an AI co-pilot at ZoomInfo. ZoomInfo is similar to a software overlay on top of CRMs, which helps to solidify and accelerate the acquisition of new clients through databases, who monitors and tracks the movement of decision makers, as well as the major financial milestones of client companies that can potentially lead to a purchase of a product or service. Presently, utilizing ZoomInfo's AI Copilot, it enables you to carry out strategic monitoring, obtain valuable client prospecting suggestions from the Copilot, and enhance the number of salespeople in companies for increased sales and business growth. So we can clearly see all these features and productivity gains, the widespread use of generative AI through the software I was talking about earlier, and hence the importance of information on NVIDIA's sales and inference. But what's interesting is to see that ultimately the software industry itself is going to be the main beneficiary of productivity gains. You can observe it particularly with coding, but Battery Ventures, which is another significant cloud financier, attempted to examine a variety of sectors for all possible productivity enhancements and ultimately determined that it was in software. They provided a hypothetical instance of a company that would earn $200 million in software, generate $200 million in revenue with a 30% growth rate, and at that stage in its development would have a 5% IBIT margin. And actually, if we were to go through each department's major expenses for such a company, so R&D, sales and marketing, and administrative, to see where we could find productivity gains through reducing the number of people working, they came to the conclusion that there were 20% productivity gains in R&D, 30% in sales and marketing. Think of ZoomInfo that I mentioned earlier about the potential productivity gains for salespeople, and 20% in administrative tasks. And so, all other things being equal, the profitability of such a company is going to go from 5 points to 23 points. It is of immense magnitude, and it is not a long-term prospect if such development were to occur in the market. It is truly representative of what generative AI can generate at present if it is implemented in companies, and it is currently being implemented, so we should anticipate substantial productivity gains in the forthcoming quarters or years in software companies. Although it may result in reduced prices, accelerated advancements, faster ROI provided to customers, or merely fitting within the boundaries, we will have the ability to observe that in the upcoming time. What's the 2024 context for the cloud sector? First of all, it's an overfunded sector due to many companies listed in a bull market in 2019, 2020, and even 2021, who have accumulated significant piles of cash, but also who in most cases generate significant cash flows for the reasons I mentioned earlier, especially regarding the negative repayment fund requirement. The other thing that is interesting is that in the economic slowdown we talked about in 2021, starting from 2022, where we were extremely afraid, 2022, which is a recession, 2023 recession, that didn't happen, but we still have a slowdown. We have growth rates that remain very substantial and often above 20%, even if it represents a slowdown after the overgrowth we witnessed during the COVID crisis. Considering our understanding that during the COVID period, companies have proactively over-equipped themselves in order to effectively cope with the decentralization of their employees working remotely from home, we had a bit of growth nonetheless, and what's interesting to note is that this slight growth has led to a profitability that has been off the charts in 2023 and is set to increase even more in 2024. And then we always have this ample cash flow that I was discussing earlier. But what may surprise some is that we've witnessed incredibly impressive performances in 2023 from cloud companies. So you got to remember that in 2022, it was like Armageddon, with drops that sometimes went up to 80%, and we'll talk about it. So there was a resurgence in 2023, but it is currently very minimal in comparison to the immense potential that exists. And finally, we have valuation levels that have remained extremely reasonable. On the growth of 2024, why do we believe she is going to continue to be present in 2024? Because you see, there was this phase of optimization that I mentioned a few moments ago, following the growth spurt caused by the COVID crisis. And here, this slide actually shows you the CapEx, the physical investments of what we call the hyperscalers, that is to say the cloud giants, those who provide the infrastructure. So in light blue, those represent the CapEx plans, and in dark blue, that represents the quarterly revenue increment. So when we say increment, it means that negative numbers do not indicate a decrease in revenue, they indicate a decrease in the rate of growth. In other words, it's a spin-off of growth. So we can clearly see in the 2021 period, the COVID crisis, which led to an overconsumption of cloud tools. So the blue bars, which are in absolutely desirable growth rates, which are way above the infrastructure deployment. Subsequently, we witnessed the rationalization by users in the year 2022, who have made slight revisions to their technological stack and their utilization of the cloud, leading to a headwind at the outset of 2023, signifying a decrease in growth and therefore resulting in a significant reduction in investment in capital expenditures, CapEx. So we've entered a new CapEx cycle, which is mainly driven by the deployment of biogenerative capacities, but these CapEx plans are indicators to move forward of the future revenue that companies plan to generate from the cloud, the infrastructures the hyperscalers plan to generate through their clients in the foreseeable future. And if generative artificial intelligence has become an engine, let us take a look at Microsoft's most recent results. Microsoft just announced a whopping 28% growth in their Azure cloud division, 6 points on generative AI. It was 3 points in the previous quarter, so it is an economic reality that is spreading even into the software I was telling you about earlier. In terms of valuation, we've used the BVP Emerging Cloud Index here, which is an American index that includes around 75 cloud stocks, such as Snowflake, Salesforce, and other similar players, including the MongoDB that I mentioned earlier. And that's an interesting clue because it has a long track record over 10 years. And finally, if we look at the valuation in terms of revenue multiples, we can see that today, despite the performance of 2023, we have returned to the valuation range that preceded the bubble caused by interest rates. In financial theory, we know that a decrease in interest rates promotes the increase in multiples of hypergrowth companies. In practice, interest rates directly impact the valuation of these companies. They have distant future financial flows that are much larger than traditional businesses, so the decrease in interest rates increases the value of these future flows. And thus, there has been a significant decrease in interest rates since the year 2017, which have approached zero, resulting in a sharp increase in the valuation multiples of these companies. The same causes leading to the same effects. The skyrocketing interest rates led to a collapse in the valuations of these companies, but eventually returning to a level that is quite reasonable since it is the same as the one that prevailed before this bubble. That being said, there's one thing that this graph doesn't take into account, and that's the fact that cloud companies are significantly more profitable today than they were on the left side of the graph. So we can, assuming all things are equal, conclude that they are currently of significantly lower value compared to their value in the earlier section of the graph. When you look at the big performance of 2023, it's interesting to note that in terms of multiples, it was minimal, because as we have significant growth in revenues, ultimately even the very important performances of 2023 have a minimal impact on valuation multiples. Potential for the future. Over 10 years, we've seen stability in multiples, which I, from a private equity background, appreciate historically. We want to build a stock's performance based on operational performance. Taking a comprehensive view, this theme has likely been one of the finest and most profitable themes to invest in during the past decade, despite the significant decline in 2022. Consequently, many investors have developed a cognitive bias, solely focusing on the performance of 2022 and perceiving this theme as having substantial drawdown potential and high risk. However, in reality, 2022 can be likened to the 2008 crisis in the tech industry, an event that occurs infrequently in our respective careers and does not accurately reflect the long-term potential of this theme. It is important to consider the broader context and not be unduly influenced by short-term fluctuations when evaluating investment opportunities. Finally, as a long-term investor with a constant multiple, you realize that over 10 years it has been an extremely interesting theme. We believe that in the next decade, taking into account the limited adoption of cloud technology and the presence of companies such as Sense, which I previously mentioned, there will be new entrants in the market targeting a small segment of their potential customer base. Discussing big addressable markets in a non-cyclical theme, we believe it will remain one of the hottest themes for the next decade. The current market context, in fact, today we have high rates. I explained to you that the rate increase was in financial theory, and therefore, as we have observed, absolutely disastrous for valuations. Today, we can think that at worst we are in a rate plateau, and we all talk more about a rate decrease. But in every way today, as we have companies with colossal cash reserves, the investments of this cash, according to our calculations, can yield up to an additional 3 points of margin. And in the event that there is a recession, or if the economic slowdown is even more pronounced than we anticipate, it is likely that we will observe a decline in long-term interest rates and possibly a resurgence in valuation multiples. And in every way, as I was previously mentioning, even in a context of economic downturn, I will not possess the term today, we ultimately have a favorable situation in terms of increasing productivity, which is a positive development that we have been waiting for. So we think that in the end, the cloud is a safe haven. It might be shocking to say this since we know that these are values that on average have more volatility, but nevertheless, as an investor, what do we look at when taking a risk? We're looking at the inherent risk that the company offers us, and the inherent risk, it's not the volatility in the stock market, it's the quality of its balance sheet. Here, we're talking about companies that often have abundant net cash flow. It's the nature of their revenue. We're talking about almost 100% recurring revenue. So we have persistent growth that could even be accelerated with generative AI. And their profitability track record is solid. No matter what happens in 2024, profitability will be on the rise. That's something we can predict for you. So the inherent risk of the company for us is minimal. In summary, I would like to emphasize that the cloud is an intriguing concept because ultimately we are not currently dealing with a disruptive technology in today's world. We are currently on a network that is stable, operating on a technology that is mature. This mature technology enables deployment. It's similar to building the paved highway that facilitated the development of automobiles. That's exactly the picture we have. It's a technology that, on top of that, is at the heart of a digital revolution for businesses that is only just beginning and will dematerialize a lot of physical processes. Data is absolutely key for the future, and it's only going to become more and more important. Companies that use data will outperform those that don't leverage the data they generate. And it's the key infrastructure for the emergence of generative AI. The generative AI and the dissemination of generative AI are only possible through the cloud. And finally, it's still the sector where unexpected technological champions will emerge today. The cloud, the Google of tomorrow, could emerge in this sector. So that's it for me, the conclusion of this webinar. We are going to open up the microphone so you can ask any questions if you have them. In all aspects, this webinar has been recorded and can be broadcasted if you desire to watch it again for further review and analysis. Thanks, y'all, and I'm open to any questions y'all might have.
The micros are open.
There are currently no questions. We are still open for live questions if you have any inquiries to ask us. I hope this webinar caught your interest. Thank you very much. See you soon.